There's no doubt that the Melbourne property market is on the way back. It's been through its post-boom correction phase, as you might term it, and it's now very much into recovery mode. In fact, it's happened, as it has in Sydney, according to most of the numbers, it's happened quite quickly and quite sharply. So the latest figures, whichever statistics you want to look at, whether it's vacancies, rents, prices, clearance rates, they all show uplift in the Melbourne market. There's of course a generalised data, and there are local differences, as is always the case, something that I always emphasise. But the generalised data is pretty much an agreement from multiple sources that the Melbourne market is now rising again, and quite strongly. The latest price figures from CoreLogic and also from SQM Research certainly indicate that prices for both houses and units have increased in the last month, very strongly in the last quarter, and we're now got to the stage where in annual terms Melbourne's back in the black. Pricing levels both for apartments and units are higher than they were 12 months ago, and it's all really happened very much in the second half of the year, month by month, step by step, ever since that federal election result, the APRA changes, the tax cuts, and then subsequent interest rate reductions. We've seen month by month improvement in the major markets. It's been happening quite broadly across Australia, but it's been perhaps most stark in the two biggest cities, including Melbourne. The latest figures from CoreLogic show for houses, for example, in monthly terms up 2.4%, quarterly 6.9%. That's a big jump in 3 months. And in annual terms about 1%. So that reflects the fact that earlier, before this most recent quarter, there had been ongoing decline. For units, even more stark in terms of annual growth. Unit markets, as we've observed in many of our reports, didn't fall as much as housing markets in Melbourne. In fact, many suburban apartment markets held up quite strongly. Median prices didn't fall in many markets, in many suburbs, in terms of apartments, but they did for houses. So the most recent month of November, unit prices in Melbourne up 1.9%, in quarterly terms up 5.3%, in annual terms up 5%. Similar, though different numbers coming from SQM Research, showing that in the last month both house prices and unit prices in Melbourne are up. And in annual terms, it's got house prices up 2.4%, but unit prices still down very marginally. So that's one of the realities of real estate statistics. You source data from two different sources and you get two different results, sometimes contradicting one another. But the general picture for prices in Melbourne is one of rising. Rents are also rising. Vacancies, according to SQM Research, are quite low in Melbourne, below 2%. Generally speaking, once again, there are, of course, regional, local differences, but many markets in Melbourne have vacancies 1.5%, very, very tight rental markets, and that's helping to underpin prices in those markets. Now, those are the sorts of places that we feature in the new edition of the top 5 Melbourne Hotspots report, which we published this week. Most of the locations that we feature in this report have very tight rental markets, vacancies that in some cases are below 1%, but generally speaking, somewhere between 1 and 2%, which is very tight. And that's putting some impetus into rental growth. And from that, as we know from history, that when vacancies are tight and rents are growing, prices have a tendency to follow. And we're starting to see that in many of the Melbourne markets, which we highlight in the new edition that we published this week of Top 5 Melbourne Hotspots report. You can get a copy of that by going to the hotspotting.com.au website and going to the investor page, and there you'll see the latest edition of Top 5 Melbourne Hotspots. All good areas. We tend to emphasise areas that have prices that are attainable to most investors. They also happen to be the markets that have the most impetus right now. So there's markets like, for example, the Darebin local government area, a little bit north of the Melbourne CBD, lots of good suburbs there, with an ongoing gentrification project sweeping through that local government area, strong apartment markets, good proximity to major jobs nodes, not just the CBD, and just what I like to term suburbs that have good real estate bones, good infrastructure, lots of demand coming into that market. So one to watch out for. Top 5 Melbourne Hotspots report. That's it for now. Let's talk again soon.